Now, since about last week in the Western mainstream media, we've been seeing a lot of reporting on North Korean military troops allegedly being in Russia and possibly being deployed by Russia to fight in the Ukraine war. Now, this story is being presented as a shocking development, it's outrageous, and it's a major escalation of the conflict. Really? Well, I have a few questions about that. First of all, is it true? Because let's face it, the Western mainstream media and Western politicians have quite a reputation of not always being 100% accurate about these things, and especially when it comes to the Ukraine war. So forgive me if I don't immediately take them at face value. But here's the thing. Even if it is true, even if there are North Korean troops in Russia fighting alongside Russia in this war, then so what? Let's take a little step back and take a look at what is actually going on here. The official story is that we're dealing with a war between Russia and Ukraine. That's the official story, but many would argue that that is 100% accurate description of the reality. Take a look at this article from Real Clear Politics, and in this article, Tulsi Gabbard says, and I quote, "The US is engaged in a proxy war with Russia using Ukraine as our military." End quote. Now, this view is shared by many others, and if you think about it, isn't it a much more realistic description of what is actually going on here? Especially if you consider the involvement of the West. The West has been sending tens of billions of dollars and euros to Ukraine. They've been sending tens of billions of dollars and euros worth of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine. So tanks, fighter jets, rockets, bombs, you name it. They've been sanctioning Russia like crazy, like no other country has ever been sanctioned before. Russia by far is the most sanctioned country in the history of the world. It's not even close. And on top of that, this. Well, this is an article from the BBC, mind you. I mean, doesn't get more mainstream than that. But even the BBC says the UK is among a number of countries with military special forces operating inside Ukraine, according to one of dozens of documents leaked online. Well, isn't that interesting? So why have we heard almost nothing about this in the mainstream media, and why hasn't this been labeled a major escalation of the conflict? There is a word for that. It's called hypocrisy. Now let's zoom out a little bit more and take a look at what is actually going on. Now, it should be pretty obvious by now to everyone that the world is splitting up. So on the one hand, we have the West, or what we usually refer to when we say the global West, meaning the US, the EU, and some other countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan. So that's what we refer to when we say the global West. And on the other hand, we have basically the rest of the world, and especially the countries we refer to when we say the global South, being many African countries, Asian countries, South American countries. Now, for centuries now, the West has played a very dominant role in this world, economically, financially, militarily, but they haven't always treated other countries, especially in the global South, very nicely. We're talking suppression, exploitation of people, as in slavery, or stealing other countries' natural resources. And during this time, they've also developed some very effective tools to keep other countries in check in order for them to maintain their hegemonic status. Now, one of the most important tools they have is, of course, economic sanctions. So you do what we tell you to do, or we will simply choke you economically. Now, also the US dollar has been weaponized, as has the SWIFT banking system. So, for example, Russia has been thrown out of the SWIFT banking system as a punishment for the Ukraine war. And if that all doesn't work, well, the West has proven not to shy away from other means like assassinations or regime change operations, and they can do that forcefully, as in militarily, or they can do that covertly, which is a bit more sophisticated and a bit more secret. But anyway, with these tools, they've been able to keep other countries in check. Now, as you can imagine, many countries, especially within the global south, are fed up with this. They're fed up being told what to do, what not to do, being told what laws to implement into their own countries, for example. They're simply fed up with this imperialistic behavior of the West. Now, the problem is, for a long time, no single country or even group of countries has ever been powerful enough to withstand the pressure from the West. Until now. Russia said no to the West. Russia is basically saying to the West that they're no longer putting up with this imperialistic behavior, and specifically, they weren't going to put up with this seemingly uncontrollable NATO expansion that they believe would be an existential threat to Russia. Now, of course, you can still disagree with how Russia handled things. We could talk about that another time, but the fact remains is that Russia is standing its ground. Now, this development, as well as some other developments, has emboldened a lot of countries in the global south to slowly turn their backs on the West and to form all kinds of new alliances with other countries without the involvement of the West. Now, the best example of this is, of course, BRICS. Another example is actually a NATO-like military treaty between Russia and, yes, North Korea, stipulating that if one country is being attacked, the other one will help defend it. Now, this treaty is no secret, it hasn't been a secret, so if it is true, and it's a big if, but if it is true that North Korean troops are in Russia, helping Russia to defend the Kursk region in Russia that has been attacked by Ukraine, then why would this be such a big thing? Why would it be called a major escalation? And again, why is the immense NATO involvement not being labeled a major escalation? Do you see the hypocrisy here? I guess my main question is this. When are we in the West, when are our politicians here in the West going to recognize and going to acknowledge that there is much more in this world than only the West? There's a whole world out there with dozens of countries that all want to be free from those Western imperialistic impositions, that want to make their own decisions and want to prosper in their own way. When are we going to stop trying to hold other countries down in order for the West to maintain its hegemonic status, which I believe the West cannot do for much longer anyway? So instead of trying to hold others down, why not cooperate? That's my question.